And speaking of red lines, the United States may have crossed a new Russian red line in Ukraine. While the world was focused on the crisis in West Asia, America was quietly shipping long-range ATACMS to Ukraine. It seems that the United States had not completely left Ukraine out to dry. But remember, ATACMS are long-range missiles that can potentially be used to hit deep within Russian territory. That's crossing a red line as far as Russia is concerned. A red line that the US didn't dare cross in 2 years of war. That is until now. How will Russia respond to this? Will it respond by hitting NATO countries? Is the United States ready to take on this new challenge? Will these new American weapons help Ukraine defend itself, or will it fuel a longer, bigger war in Europe? Here's what we know so far. On Wednesday, a top Washington official informed the press that the United States has been secretly shipping long-range ATACMS missiles to Ukraine for use in its battle to fight off the Russian forces. This happened in recent weeks. The missiles were contained in a $300 million military aid package for Ukraine that the US President Joe Biden approved on the 12th of March. The US official who revealed this news to agency Reuters on condition of anonymity did not say how many missiles were sent to Ukraine. Now, at a press briefing on Wednesday, White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan confirmed that a significant number of the missiles had been sent to Ukraine. He said, "We will send more."
I'm able to confirm, as you've heard from others, that in February, the President directed his team to provide Ukraine with a significant number of ATACMS missiles for use inside Ukraine's sovereign territory. That shipment started moving in March as part of the PDA that the President authorized on March 12th, and those missiles have arrived in Ukraine. As I said in my opening comments, we've already sent some. We will send more now that we have additional both authority and money. I'm not going to get into specific numbers for operational reasons.
Now, Sullivan said that Ukraine has committed to only use these weapons inside Ukraine and not in Russia. Ukraine has also started using them. In the early hours of the 17th of April, Ukraine used the ATACMS for the first time by launching the missiles against a Russian airfield in Crimea, about 165 kilometers from the Ukrainian front lines. Quick background information on the ATACMS as well. ATACMS, it's the acronym for Army Tactical Missile System. It is a tactical ballistic missile produced by Lockheed Martin. The longest range variants of the missiles can fly up to 190 miles. Quite impressive. It is one of the most powerful missile systems available. Here's what else you must know. 2 months prior to Russia's deployment of troops into Ukraine in 2022, Moscow, it had sent a list of demands to NATO. The demands included that NATO refrains from conducting any military activity in Ukraine or other states in Eastern Europe. Additionally, NATO was prohibited from using missiles that could reach the territory of Russia. Regarding the first demand, remember, NATO responded to Russia's aggression by deploying more soldiers in its eastern flank instead of pulling troops from that region. This action crossed Russia's red line. So it is important to note that the last time NATO crossed Russia's red line, it led to a war. And today, the war is showing no signs of abating. But there was another red line that the United States did not cross. Despite repeated pleas from Ukraine, the United States did not provide Kyiv with land-based missiles capable of hitting Russia. I'm quoting here, "We're not going to send Ukraine rocket systems that strike into Russia." Biden had explicitly stated multiple times. Now, with the apparent shift in US policy, Ukrainian ranks must be relieved. However, there is a caveat. Despite territories deep inside Russia now being within the range of this weapon, Ukraine cannot use it to hit targets in Russia. Ukraine has committed to only using the weapon inside Ukraine, not in Russia. But this is a war zone we're talking about. Can US really control Ukraine if it one day decides to use the ATACMS in its defense? We know that Ukrainian troops are on the verge of collapse on the battlefield. When NSA Jake Sullivan appeared before the press on Wednesday, he did not rule out that Russia could make additional tactical gains in the coming weeks in eastern Ukraine. He admitted to the human and material disadvantage Ukraine is currently suffering. Responding to the news of the United States applying ATACMS to Ukraine, Russian ambassador to Washington said that they will not help Ukraine turn the tide of conflict against Moscow. The Russian envoy may not be wrong after all. Ukrainian troops have been on the back foot since the failure of their counter-offensive in the summer of 2023. They're on the verge of losing in several places along the front lines. According to reports, on the 20th and the 21st of April, Russians almost broke through 10 kilometers of the Ukrainian front line at Okatine, which is a village in the Donbas region close to Avdiivka. Meanwhile, the northeastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv, which had a pre-war population of 1.4 million people, is under daily Russian fire, with the United States sending ATACMS capable of reaching targets 300 kilometers away. Ukraine hopes to seize control of the strategic Kerch Bridge in southeastern Crimea. As far as why US decided to send these missiles now, your guess is as good as mine. Perhaps the repeated Russian attacks on Ukraine's critical civilian infrastructure motivated the United States to redefine its own red line. University campuses in the United States have turned into battlefields. Its workers are being laid off for voicing their opinions. Its students are being arrested for demanding peace. But before we get into it, listen to this very important statement from Indian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Randhir Jaiswal.
In every democracy, there has to be the right balance between freedom of expression, sense of responsibility and public safety and order. Democracies in particular should display this understanding in regard to other fellow democracies. After all, we are all judged by what we do at home and not what we say abroad.
We are judged by what we do at home and not what we say abroad. A very important reminder indeed, from the world's largest democracy to the world's oldest democracy. From Harvard to Yale to MIT to Columbia, top US universities are grappling with unrest over the Gaza war. There's been protests, demonstrations, campus closures and now arrests. These protests have fueled a national debate over free speech. Let's start with what happened earlier this week. On Monday, dozens of pro-Palestinian protesters were arrested at Yale University. At New York University in Manhattan, at Stanford University, hundreds of students held a walkout. At University of California in Berkeley, students erected a Free Palestine encampment. On Wednesday, US House Speaker Mike Johnson was heckled during a visit to Columbia University. Today, over 100 students were arrested in California, Texas, as protests against Gaza war intensified. You see, across universities in the United States, students are calling for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, questioning Biden administration's support of Israel and demanding their university divest from weapons manufacturers. Students and police become involved in a standoff lasting several hours as protesters locked arms on one side and faced off with state police on the other. Some police officers have brandished batons, and some have used their bikes to physically push demonstrators back. Those who crossed the line or resisted were later arrested, with some being shoved to the ground and having their hands zip-tied. Make no mistake, these protests are not new. Since the war broke out in Gaza, American universities have struggled with policies over free speech. After weeks or months of on-campus protests and rallies, schools have been taking more forceful action to punish protesters who they say have become disruptive. Amid these protests, universities are struggling between protecting free speech and combating anti-Semitism. It's become a political minefield. But if students continue to be arrested over free speech, who are they really protecting? For now, students have vowed to continue demonstrations with new plans for a vigil to be held outside jails, where those who were arrested are being held. It doesn't look like protests are going to die down anytime soon. The Pentagon is heavily investing in AI to maintain its world dominance. Reports suggest that there is a renewed partnership between the Pentagon and Silicon Valley. The US Department of Defense and the US intelligence community is awarding contracts worth billions of dollars to major tech firms. These contracts are reportedly valued at a combined $53 billion and have been handed out to tech companies over a 3-year period between 2019 and 2022. This way, it can stay ahead of the curve in terms of technological advancements. You see, the US military and intelligence agencies, they are looking to deploy AI-enabled military technologies as well as cloud computing services. This is why the Defense Department and the CIA are now routinely awarding multi-year contracts to major tech firms. The Silicon Valley is the perfect place for its AI ambitions. After all, Silicon Valley is home to some of the biggest chip, computer and software companies, not to mention AI startups. It would not have flourished without the Pentagon's Cold War-era funding in the 1950s and 60s. Today, the Pentagon is increasingly relying on different types of defense contractors for their spending streams. One example is the National Security Administration's $10 billion 5-year contract with Amazon, called Wild and Stormy. It was awarded in 2021. The aim of the contract was to migrate the agency's intelligence as well as surveillance data onto Amazon's cloud. Now, it must be noted that these multi-year contracts primarily involve big tech firms that provide software as a service instead of hardware or equipment. This shows Pentagon and CIA's increasing reliance on the expertise of technical experts from the private sector. It reflects a strategic shift towards AI, a diversion from traditional military hardware. What is all of this for? You see, Pentagon's partnerships with tech firms serves a dual purpose. One, it enhances military capabilities for the United States. Two, it solidifies the role of private sector technology in national defense strategies. Now, here's why that matters. The Pentagon's investments in AI and cloud computing through Silicon Valley indicate a strategic direction towards modernizing defense capabilities as well as intelligence operations. Pentagon hopes that these partnerships will help it leverage cutting-edge technologies to maintain and enhance the U.S. military's operational readiness as well as strategic advantages. A lot of military funding is also going to startups. For example, the AI company called Palantir, which is now a public entity, has had contracts with the CIA and the NSA, the FBI, the Marine Corps, the Air Force, the Special Operations Command, as well as the Israeli Defense Forces. In 2020, the U.S. military awarded $800 million to Palantir, and more than half of its revenue comes from the U.S. government. Other defense tech contractors, which are still pre-IPO, include Anduril Industries, Shield AI, Hawkeye 360, Skydio, Rebellion Defense, and Apiru. Here's how much the Pentagon has spent on these companies. $28 billion has been awarded by Pentagon and the U.S. intelligence community to Microsoft, Amazon, and Google from 2018 to 2022. It's a conservative estimate. $100 billion is how much venture capital funding went to defense tech startups from 2021 to 2023. In December 2022, the U.S. Defense Department launched the Office of Strategic Capital, an entity set up to link AI and other startups with sources of private capital. By tapping into the creativity and the expertise of tech giants, Pentagon hopes to leverage the latest technological advancements in the field of defense. Overall, the strategic shift towards a more technologically integrated defense posture has the potential to reshape America's military as well as intelligence landscape, providing the United States with a significant advantage in this digital age.